I paid my parents' mortgage for 11 years while they told the family I was selfish with money, the bank statement said. Otherwise, my name is Ada Crane, and I was 34 the evening my uncle told me at my cousin's birthday dinner that he had always known I was the selfish one in the family. He said it the way people say things they believe they are finally allowed to say, with the specific relief of a man who has been holding a verdict and has found an occasion to deliver it. He said he was not surprised that I never helped my parents. He said he was not surprised that I had always looked after myself first. He said it in front of 11 people at a dinner table, and he said it with the nodding agreement of most of the room behind him. I set my fork down. I looked at my uncle. I thought about 11 years, 132 months, $156,000. The mortgage on my parents' house that I had been paying since I was 23 years old, and that not one person at that table knew I had been paying because not one person at that table had ever been told. My parents had never told them. They had told them something else entirely. I picked my fork back up. I said, "I appreciate you sharing that." I said, "I would like to show you something after dinner." He looked at me. I looked at my plate. I ate the rest of my meal. I was very calm. I had 11 years of bank statements in my bag. I want to tell you why. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever been called selfish by the people you are quietly subsidizing, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My parents' names are Gerald and Miriam Crane, and they are the kind of people who built their identity around the appearance of independence while relying structurally on the one person they had trained to be reliable without acknowledgement. That person was me. I am the older of 2 children. My brother Eli is 3 years younger, lives across the country, calls on holidays, and has never once been described by anyone in my family as selfish. He has also never once paid a bill for my parents. The distinction between us was not effort. It was proximity and availability and the specific professional competence that made me the obvious person to call when the numbers stopped working. I am a CPA. I have been for 9 years. I spend my professional days inside other people's financial situations, the gaps and the errors, and the specific places where what people believe about their money and what is actually happening with their money diverge. I am very good at finding the divergence. I am also, because my life has a consistent irony, the person who spent 11 years not looking at the divergence in my own family, because looking would have required a conversation I was not ready to have. My parents bought their house in 1994, a 3-bedroom colonial on a street of similar colonials in a suburb that had been comfortable when they bought it and that had become expensive when the neighborhood changed around them in ways they had not anticipated. The mortgage had been manageable in the years my father worked. Then my father's company downsized in the year I finished my undergraduate degree and he was 61, and the job he found next paid significantly less, and the mortgage that had been manageable became the thing the month organized itself around. My mother worked part-time at a school administrative office. Her income covered the utilities and the groceries and not much else. The mortgage gap was the problem. I found out about the gap the way I found out about most things in my family. Not because anyone told me directly, but because I was the one who understood the numbers, and the numbers started telling me something was wrong. I was 23. I had been out of school for 1 year. I had a junior position at an accounting firm and a salary that was sufficient for my own expenses and not much more. I went home for Thanksgiving, and I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the pile of mail my mother had left by the refrigerator, the way she always left the mail she was not ready to open, and I read it the way I read everything. The mortgage statement was on top, 90 days past due. I sat with the statement. Then I went and found my father in the living room, and I said I needed to talk to him about something I had seen on the kitchen counter. He said it was nothing to worry about. He said they were handling it. He said the way people say things that are not true, but that they need to believe are true. I said, how much is the past due amount? He said he did not want to discuss it. I said, Dad. He said it was not my problem. I said, I know it is not my problem. I said I would like to help if I can. He looked at the television. He said it was 4 months. He said the total past due was $5,200. I said I would cover it. He said he could not ask me to do that. I said, you did not ask me. I said, I am offering. He looked at me. He said it was a loan. He said he would pay it back. I said, of course. I paid the $5,200 the following Monday. I did not make him sign anything. I did not document it formally. I was 23, and I had just given my father money he had told me was a loan, and I believed him because he was my father, and I had not yet learned the specific lesson that believing people and documenting agreements are not mutually exclusive. The loan was never repaid. What happened instead was that the following month the mortgage was due again, and my father called me on a Sunday and said things were still tight, and could I help just this once more. Just this once more became the grammar of the next 11 years. I want to be honest about how it became structural, not dramatic, not with a conversation where we agreed to a new arrangement. It became structural the way habits become structural, through repetition, through the absence of a clear stopping point, through the specific dynamic of a family that had learned that asking Ada was easier than solving the problem. Month 2, I covered the mortgage payment. Month 3, I covered it again. By month 6, I had set up an automatic transfer, not because anyone asked me to, because I had run the numbers and I had understood that the alternative, my parents losing the house on a street they had lived on for 30 years, was something I could prevent, and that prevention was less expensive than the cost of not preventing it. $1,182 per month, consistent, on the 15th for 132 months. I did not tell anyone, not my friends, not my colleagues, not my brother Eli, who was across the country building his own life, and who had never been in the kitchen at Thanksgiving reading the mail by the refrigerator. I did not tell anyone because it did not occur to me that telling anyone was necessary. I was helping my parents. It was a private family matter. I kept the records the way I kept all records, completely, automatically, without drama, and I went back to work. What I did not know for most of those 11 years was what my parents were telling people about me. I found out in pieces. The first piece came from my cousin Dana in year 4. She called on a Tuesday evening and said she had been talking to my mother, and she wanted to ask me something directly, because she believed in asking directly. She said my mother had mentioned that I was not very generous with the family. She said my mother had implied that I made good money and kept it to myself. She said she wanted to know if that was true, because it did not sound like the person she knew. I sat at my kitchen table. I thought about 48 months of mortgage payments. I thought about the $5,200 from Thanksgiving. I thought about the furnace replacement in year 2 that I had covered without being asked, because I had called on a Sunday and heard the house was cold, and I knew what cold houses in November meant. I said it was not true. I said I was not able to go into details, but I wanted her to know it was not true. Dana said she believed me. She said she did not know why my mother would say that. I said I did not know either. I let it go. I kept paying. The second piece came from my Aunt Roberta in year 7. She pulled me aside at a family Christmas and said she was glad to see me. She said she worried about me sometimes. She said she had heard that I had a hard time sharing. She said she hoped I knew that family was the most important thing. She said she hoped I would be more giving as I got older. She said it with warmth and genuine concern and absolutely no awareness of what she was saying to a woman who had been giving $1,182 every month for 7 years. I said thank you for the advice. I drove home and I sat in my apartment and I felt something I had been keeping at a manageable distance for 7 years move closer, not anger, something heavier. The specific weight of understanding that the people you are protecting have been describing you to the people they know as the person you are protecting them from being. I did not call my parents. I opened my records folder. I printed the last 12 months of transfer confirmations. I put them in a physical folder. I put the folder in my filing cabinet. I started keeping the paper copies the same day. I did not have a plan. I just understood that the records mattered in a new way. The third piece was the one that changed everything. It arrived in year 9 from my cousin Marcus, who texted me on a Thursday afternoon with a screenshot from the family group chat. The family group chat I had been quietly removed from in year 8. Marcus was in it. He had sent the screenshot with a note that said, "This doesn't seem right," and he wanted me to know. The screenshot was a message from my mother. She had been responding to a question from my aunt about whether I would be contributing to my grandmother's birthday celebration fund. My mother had written 9 words. She had written, "Ada has never been generous with this family." 9 words, 108 months of payments, $127,476 at that point. She had never been generous. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the text. I opened my records. I printed 9 years of transfer confirmations, 108 pages. I added them to the folder. I did not call anyone. I went back to work. The payments kept going out on the 15th. If you have ever been called selfish by the people whose bills you were quietly paying, you already know the specific cold of that moment. You already know the way it reorganizes everything you thought you understood about why you were doing what you were doing. Stay with me and subscribe, because the family dinner is next, and the folder is ready, and my uncle is about to say the most expensive thing he has ever said in his life. The birthday dinner was for my cousin Lily. She was turning 30. Her mother, my Aunt Roberta, the same aunt who had advised me to be more giving at Christmas in year 7, had organized a dinner at a restaurant downtown. 14 people, 3 generations, my parents at one end of the table, my Uncle Douglas at the other. Me in the middle with my bag on the back of my chair. The folder was in the bag. I had brought it without a specific plan. I bring documentation to family events the way other people bring their phone, out of professional habit, because having it is better than not having it, and you never know when you will need it. I had not known I would need it that evening. I found out when the salads arrived. My Uncle Douglas was talking about a news story he had seen about adult children and financial responsibility. He said something about how some people in families always gave and some people always took. He said he had always believed you could tell what a person was made of by whether they showed up for their family when it mattered. He looked at me when he said it, not accidentally, deliberately, with the specific, pointed quality of a man who has had something to say for a long time and has decided a family dinner is the appropriate venue. I said I agreed. He seemed surprised. He pressed. He said he had heard over the years that I was not especially forthcoming with the family. He said he was not one to repeat things, but he thought it was important to be honest. He said he had always known I was the selfish one. 11 people heard him say it. My parents were among them. My mother looked at her salad. My father looked at the bread basket. Neither of them said a word. I set my fork down. I said I appreciated him sharing that. I said I would like to show him something after dinner. He looked confused. I looked at my plate. I ate the rest of the meal. My parents did not look at me again for the rest of dinner. That told me everything I needed to know about whether they had any intention of correcting what had been said. They did not. They were going to let it stand. They were going to let their brother call their daughter selfish in front of 11 people and say nothing. So I was going to say something. Just not until dessert was done. The dessert plates were being cleared when I reached into my bag. I placed the folder on the table, flat, closed. In the center where everyone could see it, my uncle looked at it. My Aunt Roberta looked at it. My cousin Dinah looked at me. Marcus looked at his phone. My parents looked at the folder the way people look at something they have been afraid of seeing. I said I wanted to share something with the family. I said my uncle had raised a question about generosity and I thought it was worth addressing directly. I opened the folder. I took out 3 pages, not all 132. 3. The first was a summary document I had prepared that morning. 1 page, clean, date range, monthly amount, total. November of 11 years ago to the present month, $1,182 per month, 132 months, $156,024. I placed it in the center of the table. I said this is a summary of the mortgage payments I have made on my parents' house over the past 11 years. I said the total is $156,024. I said it has been paid on the 15th of every month without exception. I said I have the bank statements for every single month if anyone would like to verify it. The table was very quiet. The second page was a bank statement. Most recent month. The transfer clearly visible. My account. My parents' mortgage servicer. $1,182. I placed it beside the summary. The third page was the first payment. 11 years ago. $5,200. The initial past due amount. The Thanksgiving weekend. I placed it on the other side of the summary. Then I looked at my Uncle Douglas. I said I have never been generous with this family. I said I want to make sure everyone at this table has accurate information. The room was completely silent. Douglas looked at the summary. He looked at the bank statement. He looked at my parents. My mother was looking at the table. My father was looking at the bread basket, which was now empty and had been empty for 40 minutes. Douglas said he had not known. I said I know. I said very few people did. He said, why did no one say anything? I said, that is a question worth asking. He looked at my parents. My father picked up his water glass. My mother smoothed her napkin. Neither of them spoke. Douglas said, Miriam. My mother said nothing. Douglas said, Gerald. My father set his water glass down. He said, Ada has always been very private about these things. That was what he said. Ada has always been very private about these things. As if my silence were the explanation. As if I had kept the payments quiet out of personal preference rather than out of the specific understanding that a family who was calling me selfish to their relatives was not a family I wanted to negotiate my generosity with publicly. I looked at my father. I said I was private because I did not think it needed to be announced. I said I was private because I thought paying my parents' mortgage was something I did because it was the right thing to do and not because I wanted recognition. I said I was not private because I was ashamed of it. I said I was private because I trusted that the people I was helping would represent me accurately to the people they knew. The room was silent. Roberta said, Ada. I looked at her. She said, is this true? I said, yes. She said, 11 years? I said, yes. She said, every month? I said, every month. She looked at my mother. My mother said, it is complicated. Roberta said, Miriam. My mother said, Ada knows how much we appreciate her. Roberta said, do we? She gestured at the table. She said, did any of us know? Nobody answered, because nobody had known. Because for 11 years my parents had accepted $1,182 a month and described their daughter as selfish to the people who asked. My Uncle Douglas spoke next. He said he owed me an apology. He said it directly. He said he had spoken without knowing the facts and he was sorry. He said it the way men apologize when they mean it, briefly, specifically, without ornamentation. I said I appreciated it. I said I wanted him to know I did not blame him. I said he had been given information and had responded to it. I said the information was the problem. He looked at my parents. He did not say anything else to them. He did not need to. My Aunt Roberta said more. She looked at my mother across the table and she said, Miriam, I have been telling your daughter for years that she needed to be more giving. She said, I owe you an apology too, Ada. She said I was repeating something without checking it. She said, I am sorry. I said, thank you, Roberta. I said, I accept it. My cousin Dana looked at me from across the table. She mouthed, I knew it. I almost smiled. Marcus put his phone down for the first time all evening. My parents sat at the end of the table in the specific silence of two people who had been revealed in front of everyone they knew and who had not yet found the words for what came next. My father found his words in the parking lot, not at the table, in the parking lot after. He came to my car while I was putting the folder in the back seat. He stood beside the car door. He said, Ada. I said, Dad. He said, I want to explain. I said, you do not have to explain. He said, I want to. I said, okay. He said, we never meant for it to become what it became. He said, the first year we told ourselves we would pay you back. He said, then the years kept going and the amount kept growing and it became something we did not know how to talk about. He said, at some point your mother started telling people you did not help because she was ashamed of needing the help. He said, if people thought you were generous, they would wonder why we needed it. He said, if people thought you were selfish, they would not ask questions. I sat with that. The specific architecture of it. They had called me selfish to protect themselves from the embarrassment of being helped. They had needed me too much to acknowledge me. He said, I know that is not an excuse. I said, no. I said, it is not. He said, I am sorry. He said it, looking at the parking lot. Not at me. I said, I know you are. He said, what happens now? I said, that depends on what you want to happen. He said, I want us to be okay. I said, the payments stop. He looked at me. I said, I have been paying your mortgage for 11 years, and you have been describing me as selfish to your family for a significant portion of that time. I said, I am going to stop the payments. I said, I think you need to find a way to manage the mortgage that does not involve my account. He said, we cannot manage it without help. I said, I know. I said, that is something you and Mom need to solve. I said, I am available to help you think through options. I said, I will sit with a financial counselor with you. I said, I will help you understand what assistance is available. I said, I will not fund the gap anymore. He was quiet. He said, that is fair. He said, we do not deserve more than that. I said, no. I said, you don't? He said, will you come to Sunday dinner? I thought about it. I said, not for a while. I said, I need some time. He said, I understand. He said, I love you, Ada. I said, I know, Dad. I said, I love you too. I said, that was never the question. He went back to his car. I sat in mine for a long time. The folder was on the back seat. 132 pages, 11 years, $156,024, all of it documented, all of it true. I stopped the payments on the 1st of the following month. The mortgage servicer sent a past due notice 30 days later. My parents called me. I sat with the financial counselor I had identified, a woman named Carol who specialized in senior housing finance, and I spent 2 hours helping my parents understand their options. Refinancing at a lower payment, a reverse mortgage given their age and equity, a rental income arrangement using the spare bedroom. Carol laid out each option clearly. My parents listened. They chose the reverse mortgage. It took 6 weeks to process. The gap was covered. My account was not involved. My father called me when it finalized. He said it worked. I said I was glad. He said Carol was very helpful. I said I knew she would be. He said, thank you for finding her. I said, of course. He said, Ada. I said, yes. He said, I know we do not deserve it. I said, it is not about deserving. I said, it is about solving the problem correctly so it stays solved. He said, yes. He said, that is what you have always done. I said, yes. I said, that is what I have always done. My mother called 3 weeks later. She did not open with warmth or with an agenda. She opened with silence, a long silence on a Sunday evening. Then she said, I owe you something. I said, okay. She said, I told people you were selfish because I was ashamed. She said, I know that does not make it right. She said, I am ashamed of that too now. She said, two different kinds of ashamed are not better than one. I said, no. I said, they are not. She said, is there anything I can do? I said, you can tell the people you told the truth. She said, I will. She said, it will be embarrassing. I said, yes. I said, it should be. She was quiet. Then she said, you kept every payment record. I said, I always keep records. She said, your grandfather was the same way. She said, he kept everything. I said, I know. She said, he used to say, if you document it, you own it. I said, he was right. She said, I should have listened to him more. I said, yes. I said, we both should have listened to him more. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. I said, good night, Mom. She said, good night, Ada. She said, I love you. I said, I love you too. She called my Aunt Roberta the following Sunday. I know because Roberta called me on Monday. She said, your mother told me everything. She said, I am glad she did. She said, I am going to tell the people I told. I said, thank you, Roberta. She said, Ada. I said, yes. She said, you should have told someone sooner. I said, I know. She said, why didn't you? I said, because I thought it was a private family matter. She said, it became a public accusation. I said, yes. I said, I understand that now. She said, next time tell someone. I said, I will. She said, good. She said, come to dinner Sunday. I said, not yet. She said, soon. I said, yes. I said, soon. I go to Sunday dinner now. Not every week. Some weeks. The weeks when I want to go. Not the weeks when I feel obligated. The difference between those two things is the whole lesson. I go because I choose to. I stay for the duration I choose. I leave when I am ready. My parents do not call me about money. They have not called me about money in 8 months. The reverse mortgage covers the gap. Carol checks in with them quarterly. I am not involved in the mechanics. I am available if something changes. The boundary is clear. The record is clean. The folder is in my filing cabinet. Behind my client files, 132 pages. I do not look at it often. I know it is there. That is enough. My grandfather kept everything. He used to say, if you document it, you own it. He meant it about property. It applies to everything. The payments I made for 11 years are documented. The truth of who I was in that family is documented. No one can tell me otherwise. Not my uncle at a birthday dinner. Not the family group chat. Not 11 years of being described as the selfish one. The bank statements say otherwise. They always did. They were just waiting for the right table. That is my story. 11 years, 132 months, $156,024. And a folder I brought to a birthday dinner, not because I planned to open it, but because I am a CPA and CPAs bring documentation everywhere. If you have been called selfish by the people you have been quietly keeping afloat, keep the records. Not because you plan to use them, because the day someone says something at a dinner table that is not true, you want the truth to be in your bag and not just in your memory. Memory is easy to dismiss. A bank statement is not. Keep the folder. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.